You think the birds left you. I thought the same thing. My first summer paying real attention to the yard, this was 2021, about a year into actually watching, I walked outside in late June and the feeders were empty, not just quiet. Sitting there, full of seed, untouched since Tuesday. I went back inside and stood at the kitchen window for an hour. One morning dove on the ground below the tube feeder. That was it. I'd spent the whole spring watching 12 to 15 birds every morning. Cardinals at the safflower, the chickadees working the tube feeder, a tufted titmouse who would spend 10 slow minutes on a single sunflower chip, turning it in her beak like she had nowhere to be. And then, somewhere between the second week of June and the 4th of July, they were just gone. Not reduced. Gone. Here's what I assumed. I'd done something wrong. Bought the wrong seed. Cleaned the feeder with something that left a trace. Stood too close to the yard one morning and scared them. Maybe the Cooper's hawk had finally pushed the whole songbird corridor out of my stretch of the neighborhood. The story I told myself, the only story I had that June, was about failure. What was actually happening in my yard? Nothing was wrong. Not one thing. That silence I experienced that summer? If you're watching this in July with a feeder that hasn't moved since last week, you are experiencing the exact same thing. And it is one of the most normal, biologically expected things that happens to a backyard bird community every single year. Nobody told me. I spent half a summer at the kitchen window, anxious, trying to figure out what I'd broken. So today, that's what this video is. We're going layer by layer through the real reason your feeder goes quiet in summer. Not the simple explanation. The actual biology, the actual behavior, the actual science behind what your yard is doing right now. And I promise, by the time we get to the last section, the empty feeder is going to mean something completely different to you. Subscribe before you leave if you're new here. Stay until the end. Let's start with what you are and aren't actually seeing, because naming it precisely matters. You are not watching a yard without birds. If you stand at your kitchen window before 7 in the morning, really still, not glancing while unloading the dishwasher, you will see birds. They are in the oak, in the holly and the shrubs along the fence line, moving through the low canopy. American robins hunting the lawn with that sideways head tilt, one eye angled at the ground, listening for earthworms a few inches below the surface. Wood thrushes. If you're in the mid-Atlantic or southeast and have enough mature canopy nearby, working through the leaf litter at the shaded back edge of your property. A ruby-throated hummingbird somewhere near whatever is blooming red in your garden this week, hovering and moving and hovering again. At 6:45 on a July morning, when the temperature is already 82 degrees and climbing, your yard is moving with birds. What it is not moving with is birds at your seed feeder. And those are two completely different observations. One of them is cause for worry. The other is not. Here's what most people don't know. Project Feeder Watch, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's citizen science monitoring program that has been tracking feeder visits across North America since 1987, documents this same pattern every single year. Summer feeder visitation rates for most common backyard songbirds drop well below winter peaks. For some species, by as much as 40% compared to their January levels, not slightly lower. 40%. Across tens of thousands of monitored yards, every June and July, the same pattern appears. The feeders go quiet. The researchers who run Feeder Watch are not surprised. They expect it. It is the data. Here's the frame that helped me most when I finally understood it. The feeder is something you built. It is not the bird's world. It is a supplement to their world. In winter, when natural food sources are genuinely scarce, that supplement is essential. It is why a chickadee lives through a 15-degree night in February. In summer, though, that supplement becomes optional. Optional because your yard is producing something the feeder cannot compete with. Something real and alive and right there in the branches, 30 feet above your head. So what's in those branches? What's drawing the chickadees and the titmice and the house finches into the canopy instead of to your feeder? The short answer is caterpillars. Stay with me here because I know that sounds like an oversimplification, but the numbers genuinely changed how I think about everything I plant and everything I do in my yard. The research on songbird reproduction, building on decades of ecological work from the Cornell Lab and from the University of Delaware, tells us something that surprises a lot of feeder watchers. Nesting birds are not raising their young on seed, not even birds we think of as seed specialists. The Carolina chickadee, the bird at your tube feeder all winter, weighing about 11 grams, roughly the same as 2 pennies, feeds its chicks almost exclusively on caterpillars and soft-bodied insects during the nesting period. Not seeds, not berries. Caterpillars. How many caterpillars? Ornithologist Doug Tallamy at the University of Delaware has been researching native insect food webs for over 2 decades. His work puts the number at between 40,000 and 70,000 caterpillars to raise a single chickadee brood from hatching to fledging. 70,000 per nest, per successful clutch. And here's the part that genuinely changed how I see my yard. That caterpillar peak is not random. It's timed. The explosive emergence of caterpillars and leaf-eating insects in May through July, particularly in the eastern United States, where most of us are birding suburban backyards, is phenologically aligned with the hatching window of most resident songbirds. The food peak and the hatching peak are synchronized. Birds have been depending on this co-evolved timing for thousands of generations. Your sunflower feeder was not part of the original design. The shift happens across species. House finches move heavily toward soft fruits and insects to feed their fledglings. Tufted titmice, cheerful winter regulars at the feeder, spend their productive summer hours hunting the canopy for caterpillars that your eye can barely detect from the ground. American goldfinches stay at Niger feeders longer than almost any other species. They're committed seed eaters through more of the year. But they're also foraging on the seed heads of native plants, black-eyed Susans, coneflower, native thistle, whatever is going to seed in August in your garden. What this means for your yard is this. The feeder fills a gap that summer closes naturally. In winter, your yard cannot feed your birds. In summer, your yard is the restaurant, and your feeder is a vending machine sitting in the parking lot. The birds are not ignoring you. They are eating well. But natural food abundance is only part of the story. Because even the species that do visit summer feeders, cardinals, mourning doves, house finches, tend to come quickly and leave. Less of the relaxed, lingering browsing you see on a February morning. They arrive, they take, and they go. And one reason for that behavior has nothing to do with food at all. It's about vulnerability. The birds are hiding, not from you specifically, from everything. Because right now, in the period between late June and August, most of your backyard birds are in the middle of a process called the pre-basic molt, the annual replacement of every feather they carry. Not some feathers, all of them. Shed and regrown sequentially over a period of about 6 to 8 weeks. Molt is not dangerous for most birds in the clinical sense. The process is staggered through specific feather tracts in a particular order, and most birds stay fully flighted throughout. But during peak molt, a bird's flight efficiency is genuinely reduced. Worn, older feathers at the end of their lifespan are shorter and less aerodynamic than the new ones coming in behind them. A northern cardinal in mid-July, a bird that weighs about 45 grams, roughly the weight of a golf ball, is flying on compromised equipment. The body knows this in the way bodies know their own limits, so the behavior reflects it. It stays low. It stays covered. It visits your feeder faster and retreats to the dense shrubs. It does not perch in the open on top of the feeder post for 5 minutes the way it did in March. The male cardinal in mid-molt is one of the more striking birds of a summer yard if you know what you're looking at. He looks rough, patchy, slightly ragged, new feather shafts pushing through worn, faded old plumage, the brilliant red coming in unevenly, the coat being repaired from the inside out. I used to look at a molting cardinal and assume something was wrong with him. I'd watch for a long time, trying to figure out what illness explained the appearance. It took me most of a second summer to understand. That bird is at its most actively biological, not sick, working, growing. It is metabolically expensive, energetically demanding work. And the coat you'll spend all of November watching come to the feeder, the one that makes you catch your breath a little on a gray December morning, that coat is being built right now. There's one more layer to the summer disappearance that most people miss entirely, and it's about who is actually in your yard versus who you assume is in your yard. Pay attention to this. Post-breeding dispersal is what ornithologists call the movement of birds away from their nesting territories after the breeding season ends. The pair of cardinals that were defending your yard fiercely from late March through early June, their core home range may have shifted considerably by July. Not migrated, not lost, just operating in different geography now that the compulsion to hold a specific territory has lifted. At the same time, there is a population in your yard right now that is almost entirely invisible unless you're looking for it. This year's fledglings, young birds hatched in May or June, out of the nest but still learning the world. They practice what behavioral researchers call cryptic behavior. They actively minimize their own visibility. They stay in dense vegetation. They do not sing. They move tentatively and follow adults when they can find them. Last summer, I was watching what I initially took to be an odd titmouse near the heated bird bath. Slightly smaller than an adult, the feathering not quite settled, some traces of juvenile plumage still visible through the fresh adult pattern. I watched it try to drink, not the practiced, relaxed drinking of a bird that has used a bird bath for 3 winters. The slow, testing, try and back off behavior of something encountering running water for maybe the 3rd or 4th time in its life. That bird had been born within 100 meters of my yard. It was weeks old. It was figuring out water. Your yard is a nursery right now. You just cannot see it. They are in the thickest part of the shrubs, completely silent, watching you walk to your car. There's a part of this that gets uncomfortable, mostly because I made this exact mistake. When the feeder goes quiet in July, the most common response is to add more seed, a new feeder in a different spot, a different blend, something labeled summer birds, something with dried fruit or nuts. I understand the impulse completely. I've felt it, because the feeders feel like care. When the birds aren't coming, refilling the feeder feels like doing something, like keeping the door open. Here's what I want to be honest about. Seed that sits in a tube feeder in summer heat and humidity, especially after rain, develops mold faster than most people realize. Some species of mold that grow on wet or overheated seed produce compounds that are genuinely harmful to birds if consumed in meaningful quantity. Project Feeder Watch's summer feeder guidance and resources from the National Wildlife Federation both address this directly. The seed in your feeder from last Thursday, having sat through 3 90-degree afternoons and an afternoon thunderstorm on Saturday. It may not be the safest offering you can make right now. I am not saying this to make you feel guilty. Birds in summer are not spending enough time at feeders to be harmed at scale in the way I am describing. But the instinct to add more seed when things go quiet can be moving in the wrong direction. The truth is, a bird's needs in summer are genuinely different from what they need in winter. Water is first. Clean, moving water, a dripper or a mister, because the sound of moving water carries through a yard and draws birds that would never find your seed feeder. A rufous-sided towhee in the back shrubbery, a warbler passing through, species that don't do feeders at all. And beyond water, what your birds need from your yard is what is already there, the caterpillars in your trees, the insects in your native shrubs, which means not treating for pests in ways that collapse the food web your birds are actually depending on during the most demanding season of their year. I learned this the hard way. In the summer of 2021, I bought a new feeder, convinced the problem was positioning. I moved things around. I tried a different spot by the fence. What I should have done was clean the bird bath every 2 days and leave everything else alone. The birds were fine. The issue was entirely in my interpretation of what silence meant. The science on this changes the entire frame. There are more birds in North America in July than in January. That's not an approximation. The North American Breeding Bird Survey, administered by the USGS and running since 1966, and the eBird database from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, now containing billions of bird observation records from citizen scientists across the continent, both reflect the same underlying reality. Summer is when the bird population peaks because successful nesting has just added a full cohort of this year's young birds to the population. All of those fledglings you're barely seeing in your yard. They're real. They're out there. They hatched in May and June. The research on seasonal feeder use, documented across the Journal of Avian Biology and Cornell's own feeder watch analyses, consistently shows the same thing. The summer lull in feeder watching is a lull in birds visiting a specific artificial food source at the precise moment when that source is least necessary to them. That is not the same as a lull in birds. Those are completely different things, and confusing them is the source of almost all the anxiety I felt that first summer. There's something worth sitting with in that distinction. We tend to measure the birds in our lives by what we can count at the feeder. It is the easiest metric, a clear view, a familiar spot, a place we know to look. But the feeder-centered view of the bird year is missing the season when the yard is most alive, most biologically dense, most full of behavior. Summer is not the off-season for your birds. Summer is everything. The most birds, the most complexity, the most activity, all happening in your canopy, in your shrubs, at your bird bath, in the leaf litter at the back edge of your yard, where you almost never look. The birds have not left your life. Your view has just narrowed to the wrong spot. I've saved this last section for last, because it has to be last. This past July, heat index around 95 degrees through most of the second week, I was convinced my Tuesday couple was gone. If you've been around this channel for a while, you've heard me mention them. A pair of Carolina chickadees that have been coming to my yard for close to 4 winters now, 11 grams each, about the weight of 2 pennies. They show up most reliably on Tuesday mornings between 7 and 7:30. I don't know if the Tuesday pattern is meaningful or just how my brain has organized what is probably random variation in their schedule. But 4 winters in, it is held, and those 2 birds mean something to me that I can't fully account for. They were gone in July, not just on Tuesday mornings, every morning for about 3 weeks. I'd check the feeder before 7 and see other chickadees, quick passes, birds whose particular behavior I didn't recognize as familiar, and I'd check again in the evening. The Tuesday couple weren't there. I know that sounds like I'm claiming I can identify individual chickadees on site, and I'm not going to try to fully defend that. I will say this. After 4 years of watching 2 birds return to the same feeder in the same particular way, you develop a sense for their behavior. Those birds were not there. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't worried. Here is what I know now. What I should have known that July. My chickadees were almost certainly within 30 meters of my yard the entire 3 weeks, working through the dense understory and low canopy in the way that summer chickadees work, hunting caterpillars, staying in cover, doing exactly what their biology was asking of them. Not sick, not displaced, not choosing a different yard, just living a season in the places where that season actually happens. And those places, in July, are not at my tube feeder. On a Tuesday morning in the middle of August, they were back. Same tube feeder, same perch on the second ring from the top, same particular way of pulling a sunflower chip and carrying it to the Japanese maple to eat it. I was at the kitchen window before work, coffee going cold in my hand, and there they were. They had never left the neighborhood. They had been 30 meters away in the thick part of the canopy, being summer chickadees. And when summer ended, when the caterpillars thinned and the leaves started turning and the evening temperature finally started dropping, they came back. To the feeder, to the Tuesday schedule, to what I'd left out for them. I'm still trying to figure out what to make of 4 winters of this. I'm not going to tell you it's more than it is. I'm not going to tell you it's less. What I can tell you is that Every year since I've been paying real attention, the birds that go quiet in June come back in September. Not all of them. Migration is a different and harder thing, and that's a different video. But the residents, the year-round birds, the ones whose territories overlap with your yard through the cold months, they come back. Your yard is not broken. Your birds are not gone. You did not scare them off. The birds are just having summer. If you've ever stood at the window in late June and felt that specific, quiet worry, the one that says, "Did I do something wrong? Have they moved on? Is this the year they don't come back?" I want to hear about it. Tell me what happened in your yard. Tell me whether any of this changed how you're reading the silence. Leave it in the comments. I read everyone, and honestly, these are the stories I carry the longest. I'll see you in the next one.